All right, continuing on with our 1950s and the civil rights movement, the responses to the Brown versus the Board of Education decision were swift. Alabama and Virginia tried to nullify the decision, which they can't really do, but they argued that integration was a states' rights issue. We're going to hear that term come up quite a bit. Now, what is it a states' rights issue to do? And that is to promote segregation. So Alabama and Virginia are going to be our test case there. There is massive resistance within Congress. After Brown versus the Board of Education, members of Congress, about 100 members of Congress, mostly Southern Democrats, signed what's referred to as the Southern Manifesto. This is a promise that they were going to resist this decision with every tool at their disposal. Three Southerners decided not to sign this Southern Manifesto. One of them is Lyndon Johnson, who's later going to go on to become president after the Kennedy assassination, and he's going to sign the Civil Rights Act in 1964. So at the grassroots level, there is a sort of a middle-class version of the Ku Klux Klan that emerges, referred to as citizens' councils. Now, of course, the implied item that's missing here is these are white citizens' councils because they're promoting white supremacy. What they wanted was to promote segregation, resist integration as promised by Brown versus the Board of Education, and they're going to use economic coercion, which really is kind of a euphemism for saying they're going to deny African Americans jobs and consumer products if they tried to promote racial integration. These citizen councils, I'm sure, were also not above other Klan type tactics. Now, Montgomery Bus Boycott. Let's move on to that one because this is another specific incident within the 1950s dealing with the civil rights issue. And the Montgomery Bus Boycott often is mythologized. Rosa Parks is going to be the person that kind of sparks the Montgomery Bus Boycott. But Rosa Parks was not a tired woman that refused to move. She was only 42 years old. She was also a member of several civil rights organizations. She was becoming more radical as she got older as well. She was, yes, a seamstress, that's true, and she was coming off a day's work, but there had been several cases dealing with segregation on public transportation, and Rosa Parks felt that this was a good time to add another test case. Not realizing how big it was going to blow up necessarily, but knowing that this challenge was needed. So Rosa Parks refuses to move to the back of the bus. We all know that story. And then immediately the civil rights organizations in Montgomery kick into action because Rosa is going to be a good test case. Ms. Parks is going to be arrested, but that's going to lead to a year-long boycott of the bus system. That idea was ready and in place, and Rosa Parks had been part of all of that. The arrest leads to that year-long boycott of the bus system. Martin Luther King Jr. is going to be brought in to help lead this boycott, partially because he's a doctor in religion, and he has sort of moral authority because of that, and also because he's a young, up-and-coming activist himself. He's going to have a nonviolent civil disobedience philosophy. Here's the thing that people miss about Martin Luther King Jr., though. He's confrontational. Nonviolence does not mean passive. Martin Luther King Jr. is going to stick his face where people are going to get mad, and he's going to allow himself to get arrested. He's going to allow violence against his people. And that way it's going to show the violence of white supremacy towards the Black population. Now, we can see that in Montgomery as well, because Rosa Parks was arrested, that year-long boycott happens. The majority of the people that rode that bus system were the Black population. Now, when they go on a boycott, the city doesn't like that because they're losing government revenue. So in order to try to break the boycott, people threatened the Black population. The boycotters tried to organize carpools, and police were pulling them over and arresting them. They passed laws that said it was illegal for more than two people to be in a car at one time. So all of this stuff, all of these tools of white supremacy are going to be used against the Montgomery bus boycotts, and yet, the population wins. The Black population's boycott of the bus system wins, and in the end, the buses in Montgomery are forced to integrate. Rosa Parks' protest worked. Martin Luther King Jr. and his nonviolent civil disobedience system was going to be successful, and it's going to spark the rest of what happens throughout the 1950s and early 1960s.